All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of source material. This explainer is going to take us deep into the shadows of human psychology, subconscious desires, and, those incredibly complex relationship dynamics we all deal with. It essentially explores what the author describes as the hidden codes of the mind. By using the foundational research of psychoanalysis, the source helps us understand why people act in ways that, frankly, often completely defy pure logic. We're going to look at how our deep-seated emotions clash with reason, and then this is the best part, how this source translates these historical theories into a practical set of behavioral rules, rules that are all about self-mastery and setting some seriously firm emotional boundaries. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start off with Freud's biggest question, move into the three secret layers of the mind, look at repressed desires and conflict, and then pivot to 7 mental weapons for defense, before finally wrapping up with how to remain steadfast to your mission. Starting with Section 1, Freud's biggest question. To really understand the human mind, we have to jump right into the historical context of a guy who literally spent 3 decades of his life plunging into its deepest trenches. Just take a look at this quote from Sigmund Freud. After 30 years, think about that, 3 whole decades of rigorous psychoanalytical research, he famously admitted to just hitting a brick wall with this exact question. According to the source material we're exploring today, the reason this question remains such a massive paradox for him is that the human mind, and specifically in this context the female mind as analyzed by the source, simply doesn't operate on pure predictable logic. Instead, the author argues that it's built out of raw emotions, desires, fears, memories, and unexpressed pain. When you try to grasp all of that using purely logic, well, it just slips right through your fingers like sand. And the source highlights a brilliant core conflict right here. On the outside, what do you see? A totally calm exterior. You see peaceful innocence, you hear logical words, and you see a societal mask that makes everything look super straightforward. But the material argues that beneath that polite smile, there is an absolute hidden inner storm. It's the silent, hidden world filled with illogical desires and unspoken truths. Often, people don't even truly know what they want themselves because their deepest drivers are buried way down in this stormy layer, totally disconnected from their logical, speaking voices. Moving on to Section 2, the 3 secret layers of mind. So, how does the source actually break down for his famous architecture of the psyche to explain these hidden storms? First up, we have the ego. You can think of this as the mask. The source describes this as the layer that speaks the language of society. It's that voice in your head that says, hey, I'm reasonable, I want good things, I'm a good person. It runs on logic and uses words to communicate with the outside world. Basically, it's exactly what a person wants society, and honestly often themselves, to see. Next is the superego. The text literally calls this the chains of culture. This is that heavy, nagging internal voice of conditioning. It's your parents, religion, school, and just general societal norms all whispering, you really shouldn't do this. It's the layer that creates shame and enforces our moral boundaries, constantly regulating our behavior to make sure we stay neatly within the acceptable lines of culture. And finally, we reach the id, the wild desires. Now, the absolutely crucial point here, according to the source, is that this layer never sleeps. It's like a primal toddler that just demands immediate gratification. It doesn't care about logic, it doesn't feel fear, and it has absolutely zero sense of morality. This is where the dark attractions, the power dynamics, and those wild fantasies live. It totally ignores rationality, and it's this exact layer that creates such an intense inner conflict when it violently clashes with the ego and the superego. Which brings us to Section 3, repressed desires and conflict. Okay, so what actually happens when that wild id gets shoved down by the superego? The source poses a highly critical, real-world question here to illustrate the theory. Why on earth would someone leave a stable, seemingly great situation only to return to a volatile, unpredictable, or even toxic partner? The logical ego says they want a good person, right? But their actions are telling a completely different story. So why the sudden coldness? Why go back to the chaos? Well, the answer, the material argues, lies right here. Repressing a desire doesn't erase it. It actually makes it stronger. When societal conditioning forces someone to hide their raw, illogical desires, those desires don't just pack up and vanish. No, they get shoved down into the subconscious, where they act like a never-ending hunger. It's like a pressure cooker. The source suggests that this subconscious pull will eventually just override all logic, causing people to act in ways that seem 100% contradictory to their stated goals. All right, Section 4, 7 mental weapons for defense.
So how are we supposed to navigate all this? Well, here the source shifts from abstract theory to some very actionable behavioral rules, framed specifically as a guide to protect your psychological well-being. Let's look at the first four. Rule 1, watch behavior, not words. Rule 2, realize not everyone actually wants what's best for you. Some people are just seeking validation. Rule 3, master your emotions so you don't end up a slave to them. And Rule 4, don't chase every attraction. Just because something glitters doesn't mean it's not a fire, right? These rules really emphasize a massive shift towards self-reliance and setting strict emotional boundaries. Let's zoom in on Rule 1 for a second, because the source emphasizes this heavily. Watch behavior, not words. Remember how we said the ego speaks in logical words, but the id drives true desires? That means words can be incredibly misleading. Someone might literally tell you that you're their whole world and then totally ignore your texts the very next day. The source firmly states, believe in their consistency, not their dialogue, because where there is no consistency, there is absolutely no real commitment. Jumping over to Rule 5, let's see how this builds on self-awareness. The source contrasts two states of being here, fleeing your shadow versus befriending your shadow. Look, we all have a dark side, a part of us that just craves validation and dominance. If you fight it or try to run from it, the source argues that you remain weak. You're easily controlled by others. But if you acknowledge it, if you understand it and direct it with self-awareness, that's when you unlock true strength. You basically become the master of your own internal landscape. Which naturally leads us into Rule 6, set your boundaries and stick to them. The material points out something crucial. Your time, your energy, and your soul are valuable. Not everyone deserves access to them. If someone is using affection as a tool for control, that classic if you do this, then I'll love you routine, you have to recognize that love is not a transaction. The big takeaway here is learning the absolute power of saying no, and more importantly, saying it without a single drop of guilt. And our final part, Section 5, steadfast to your mission. This brings us to the ultimate conclusion the source material is driving toward. True power, according to the text, is built in these 3 steps. Step 1, stop chasing external validation. Step 2, know yourself deeply. And yeah, that includes your shadow. And finally, Rule 7, marry your mission first. The source argues that your primary purpose shouldn't just be finding a relationship, it should be building yourself into something greater. When your own life's mission becomes your absolute first priority, you generate this incredible internal strength that makes you virtually immune to manipulation. You become complete on your own. The author actually leaves us with this incredibly stark warning. If you don't know yourself, every beautiful face will be the cause of your downfall. If you lack that self-awareness, if you just become a slave to fleeting emotions and whatever external attraction comes along, you are constantly going to lose yourself in other people. These rules aren't just neat little pieces of information, the source claims. They are a literal shield for your self-respect. So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with one final, pretty provocative question directly inspired by the material. Are you standing in your own power, or are you just seeking validation from the outside world? It's a really powerful thought to reflect on as you navigate your own internal boundaries. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and definitely keep growing.